The planet Sci-Fi was a desolate wasteland, its sky dark with storm clouds and its land covered in the ruins of an ancient civilization. This world had once belonged to the Xiphorians, an advanced alien race known for their strict laws and powerful empire. But now it was nothing more than a graveyard, forgotten by time. Captain Elias Carter adjusted his breathing mask as he stepped carefully over the cracked ground. His boots crunched against the dust and broken stone. The air was thin, filled with the distant echoes of past battles. His team had left hours ago, but something deep inside him told him to stay behind. His mission was simple: explore the ruins, gather data, and return to the ship. But curiosity pulled him deeper into the crumbling remains of an ancient temple. The walls were covered in strange symbols, glowing faintly under the dim light of his flashlight. He felt like he was being watched, though there was no one around. Then he saw it. At the center of the ruined chamber, resting on an altar made of black stone, was a sword unlike any other. Its long, curved blade shimmered, glowing with an unnatural blue light. The hilt was crafted from an unknown metal, decorated with markings that pulsed as if the sword itself was alive. Elias hesitated. He had heard stories of the Xiphorian sacred blade, a weapon so powerful that only the Queen's chosen warrior was allowed to wield it. Xiphorian legend claimed that if an unworthy hand ever touched the blade, it would bring disaster upon their entire race. But legends were just stories, right? Something inside him whispered, "Take it." Elias reached out and wrapped his fingers around the hilt. The moment he lifted the sword, a deep hum filled the air, and the temple shook violently. Blue energy crackled around the blade, wrapping around his arm like living electricity. The walls trembled, and a loud, piercing sound filled the chamber. Elias's heart pounded. He tried to let go, but the sword refused to release his grip. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he saw flashes of the past. Xiphorian warriors, great battles, and a dark prophecy whispered in a language he didn't understand. Then, as suddenly as it started, the energy vanished. Elias stumbled backward, breathing heavily. The sword was still in his hand, but the temple had grown silent. Too silent. Then, a voice boomed across the ruins. "Human, what have you done?" A wave of energy exploded outward, sending Elias crashing into the stone wall. He groaned, struggling to stand as his head spun. But he wasn't alone anymore. Above him, a holographic figure flickered into existence, a towering Xiphorian warrior dressed in ancient battle armor. Its glowing red eyes burned with pure hatred. "You have broken the sacred law," the figure roared. "No human was ever meant to touch the blade of the Queen. Your kind will suffer for this crime." Elias clenched his jaw. His instincts screamed at him to run, but something told him this was bigger than him now. Before he could respond, the warrior lifted a hand. A strange pulse shot through the air, like an invisible signal being sent across the stars. Miles away, deep within the Xiphorian homeworld, Queen Syra sat on her throne, surrounded by her advisors. Her golden eyes flickered open as a warning signal flashed in front of her. The sacred blade had been touched. The Queen's expression darkened, her sharp claws digging into the armrest of her throne. The entire Xiphorian fleet had been waiting for centuries to hear this signal. It meant only one thing: a grave crime had been committed. She stood up, her towering figure casting a long shadow over her chamber. Her voice was cold as ice. "Prepare the fleet, find the human who did this, and bring me his head." Back on Sci-Fi, Elias finally managed to move. His mind was racing. He had just triggered something far bigger than he could understand. As he stared down at the sword, one terrifying thought echoed in his mind. "I just started a war." Elias didn't have time to process what had just happened. The temple walls were still humming with the aftershocks of whatever energy had been released when he touched the sword. His grip on the blade was firm, but his mind screamed at him to drop it and run. But it was too late. A strange blue pulse erupted from the hilt, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. The ancient ruins reacted as if waking from a long sleep. Symbols on the walls began glowing, shifting, and changing, forming new patterns that had been frozen in time for centuries. The air became heavy, charged with a strange power that made Elias's skin prickle. He swallowed hard, backing away as the holographic warrior stepped forward, its burning red eyes locked onto him. It was a projection, some kind of ancient security system, maybe, but it felt alive, as if it carried the rage of every Zephyrian who had ever lived. "You do not understand what you have done," the figure growled, its voice echoing through the chamber. "The sacred blade is bound to the Zephyrian bloodline. No outsider has ever touched it and lived." Elias tightened his grip on the sword. "Yeah, well, I guess I'm full of surprises." The warrior didn't react to his sarcasm. Instead, it lifted a hand, and the air around Elias turned ice cold. The ground trembled, cracks spreading outward as an invisible force wrapped around his chest. He gasped, his lungs tightening as if unseen fingers were crushing him. Pain shot through his body. The sword vibrated, glowing even brighter as if resisting whatever was attacking him. Then, boom! A shockwave exploded from the sword, shattering the warrior's projection into a million flickering fragments. Elias was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to move, scrambling to his feet. The temple was collapsing. Pieces of stone rained down as the entire structure began to cave in. The sword was still pulsing in his hand, almost as if urging him to run. He didn't need to be told twice. Dashing through the crumbling corridors, he barely avoided falling debris. His mind was racing. He had triggered something powerful, something ancient, and he had no idea what it meant. But one thing was clear: he was in serious trouble. Outside, his ship, the Odyssey, was waiting. The sleek silver craft sat on a rocky plateau, its engines humming softly as it prepared for departure. The moment Elias burst through the ruins, his comms earpiece crackled to life. "Carter, what the hell is going on?" It was Commander Jackson Price, his voice filled with urgency. "No time to explain," Elias gasped, sprinting toward the ship. "Just get us off this planet. Now." The ship's hatch slammed shut behind him the second he jumped inside. He barely made it to the cockpit before the ground exploded beneath them. Jackson didn't ask any more questions. With a sharp turn, he launched the Odyssey into the sky, engines roaring as they escaped the crumbling ruins. Through the cockpit window, Elias watched as blue energy erupted from the temple, shooting straight into the sky like a beacon. A beacon. His stomach twisted. "Oh no." Jackson glanced at him, still gripping the controls. "What? What did you do?" Elias exhaled slowly. I just sent out a signal." Silence filled the cockpit. Then, suddenly, alarms blared. A new energy signature had appeared on the ship's radar. Multiple signatures. Jackson's face went pale as he looked at the readings. "We've got incoming." Elias's blood turned to ice. "Who?" Jackson swallowed. "The Zephyrian Armada." Elias turned back to the window, just in time to see the first warship emerge from hyperspace. It was massive, sleek, black, and shaped like a dagger cutting through the void. More ships followed, hundreds of them, blocking out the stars as they surrounded the Odyssey. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the ship's comms. "Human, you have stolen what belongs to the Queen. Surrender the blade, or be destroyed." Elias's grip on the sword tightened. He could feel its energy flowing through him, connecting him to something ancient and powerful. There was no way out, and he knew, without a doubt, this was just the beginning. Elias stood frozen in the cockpit, his heart pounding against his ribs. Outside, the Zephyrian Armada had formed an impenetrable blockade. Their warships loomed like shadows against the vastness of space, each one armed with weapons powerful enough to obliterate planets. The Odyssey was trapped. Jackson's fingers hovered over the control panel, sweat beading on his forehead. We're outnumbered. Outgunned. What's the play here, Carter? Elias didn't answer. His mind was racing. The blade in his hand hummed with raw energy, almost as if it were aware of what was happening. He could feel its ancient power coursing through him, whispering something just beyond comprehension. Then, the Queen's voice boomed through the ship's comms. You have violated the sacred law of my people. You will not leave this system alive. Elias swallowed hard. He had seen footage of Queen Xira before, but the holographic projection that now filled the cockpit was something else entirely. She was towering, regal, with an aura of absolute dominance. Her obsidian black armor shimmered with strange markings, glowing faintly as if infused with some otherworldly force. Her piercing golden eyes locked onto him, her expression unreadable but brimming with restrained fury. You dare defile our most sacred relic. You, a mere human, are unworthy of its power. Elias took a shaky breath. Listen, I didn't steal anything. I was just. Silence. The walls of the cockpit shook as her voice carried across the comms. Even through a projection, her power was palpable. Jackson shot Elias a desperate look. Damn it, Carter. Just give them the sword. We're about to get vaporized. But something deep inside Elias told him that surrendering wasn't an option. The sword had chosen him. He didn't know why or what it meant, but he could feel it. This was bigger than just a relic. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Then she said something that sent a chill down his spine. You are not the first human to touch the blade. Elias frowned. What? A dark smile crossed her lips. There was one before you. He, too, believed he was worthy, and he paid the price. Before Elias could react, the projection flickered, and suddenly, a new image appeared. A man knelt on the floor of a Xiphorian chamber, bound in chains. He was battered, bruised, his once proud uniform now torn and stained with blood. But despite the agony in his eyes, there was also defiance. Elias felt his stomach drop. He recognized the face instantly. It was his father. Jackson sucked in a sharp breath. No way. That's Admiral Carter. Elias's hands clenched into fists. His father had disappeared nearly 2 decades ago on a mission beyond the Outer Rim. The official report had claimed his ship was lost to a black hole. But now he was staring right at him. The Queen's voice was smooth, almost mocking. I wonder, human, are you willing to share his fate? Elias's grip on the sword tightened. A fire ignited in his chest, burning away the fear and confusion. His father wasn't lost. He was taken, and the Xiphorians had lied. I don't know what you did to him, Elias said, his voice cold. But I promise you, I'm going to find out. The Queen merely tilted her head. You will not live long enough. Without warning, the entire ship jolted. The Odyssey's shields flared, barely absorbing the impact of a direct energy blast from one of the Xiphorian warships. Jackson cursed, flipping switches wildly. They're firing on us. Another hit, then another. The ship rattled violently, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. Elias had seconds to decide. He could surrender, give up the sword, bow to the Queen and hope for mercy. Or, his fingers wrapped tighter around the hilt. No, his father wasn't dead. He had been lied to his whole life, and now he had the power to change everything. Elias closed his eyes, letting the energy of the sword flow through him. And then, he made a choice. Jackson, he said, his voice steady. We're not running. Jackson's eyes widened. What? Elias lifted the sword, and suddenly, the cockpit exploded with light. The ship's systems flickered wildly. The Xiphorian warships hesitated, their scanners struggling to process what was happening. And then, before the Queen's shocked gaze, Elias vanished. Darkness. Silence. Elias felt like he was floating in an endless void. He couldn't see, couldn't hear, just the sensation of weightlessness pressing against him. His mind struggled to grasp reality, to hold on to something solid, but there was nothing. And then, all at once, pain. A shockwave of energy slammed into him, like his body was being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. His vision snapped back into focus, and suddenly, he was no longer aboard the Odyssey. He was somewhere else. The ground beneath him was cold, smooth, almost metallic. Strange blue symbols pulsed faintly, stretching out in every direction. The air felt thick, humming with an unseen force that sent shivers down his spine. Elias pushed himself up, his limbs still tingling from the transition. He gripped the sword tightly, its energy still buzzing beneath his fingertips. Where the hell was he? Then he heard it, a whisper. Not words, not a voice, but a feeling, pressing against his thoughts like a faint echo of something ancient. He turned sharply, scanning the space around him. It wasn't a room. It was an arena, circular in shape, with towering stone pillars stretching high above. The ceiling was hidden in darkness, the only light coming from the symbols etched into the walls. And across from him, standing at the far end, was her, Queen Tyra. But this was no hologram. This was real. She stood taller than before, her obsidian armor shifting like living metal. Her golden eyes gleamed with a mixture of fury and intrigue. Behind her, ghostly apparitions of Xiphorian warriors flickered in and out of existence, their bodies composed of glowing blue mist, their faces twisted in expressions of silent judgment. Elias's breath hitched. He was not alone here. The queen stepped forward, the very air around her trembling with power. "You have entered the chamber of the ancients." Her voice was calm, but beneath it was an unshakable authority. "Few have set foot here and lived to tell the tale. You will not be one of them." Elias clenched his jaw. "You drag me here. Why? To kill me yourself?" A low, almost amused sound rumbled from her throat. "You misunderstand, human. You are here because the blade willed it." The sword in his hand pulsed as if in response. Elias felt a rush of unease. What does that mean? The queen lifted her hand, and suddenly, the entire chamber shifted. The walls stretched and morphed, the symbols burning brighter. The mist-like warriors solidified, their spectral weapons flickering with deadly intent. And then, they charged. Elias barely had time to react. He dove to the side as the first warrior swung a curved blade, the force of the attack splitting the stone floor where he had just been standing. Another warrior appeared behind him, striking with blinding speed. Elias raised his sword instinctively, and the moment the blades connected, a shockwave of energy burst outward. The impact sent both of them skidding back. The warriors didn't hesitate. They attacked in perfect unison, their movements eerily synchronized, like a single entity controlling them all. Elias was fast, but they were faster, stronger, more experienced. He fought desperately, dodging and countering, his mind racing to find a way out. But no matter how many times he struck them down, they would reform, rising from the mist like ghosts that refused to die. "You cannot win, human," the queen said, watching with an almost detached expression. "You are but a child playing with forces beyond your comprehension." Elias gritted his teeth. "Yeah, then maybe it's time I learn." He took a deep breath, tightening his grip on the sword. He had been reacting this whole time, fighting out of instinct. But something told him that wasn't enough. This sword, it wasn't just a weapon. It was something more. And then it hit him. The energy coursing through the chamber, the warriors, the queen herself, it was all connected. The sword was part of it. And if he could tap into that. Elias closed his eyes and let go of control. Instantly, the world around him shifted. Time seemed to slow. He could feel the energy flowing around him, the way the warriors moved before they even moved. He could sense the queen's presence, a towering force pressing down on everything. And he could see the cracks. When the next warrior lunged, Elias didn't dodge. He stepped into the attack, twisting his body at the last second. The warrior's blade missed by a hair, and in that instant, Elias struck. His sword didn't just cut through the warrior. It unraveled him. The mist shattered, the warrior dissolving into nothingness. The queen's eyes narrowed. Elias exhaled, his body still buzzing with the aftershock. He had felt it. The exact moment when the energy of the warrior became unstable. And now he knew how to win. The warriors charged again, but this time, Elias moved differently. He flowed like the energy itself, weaving between attacks with impossible precision. One by one, the warriors fell, each strike of his blade severing them from the force that bound them. The chamber trembled, the symbols flickering wildly. And then the last warrior vanished, leaving only silence. Elias turned to the queen, his breathing heavy. "Still think I'm unworthy?" For the first time, Queen Syra looked, uncertain. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Perhaps I was mistaken," she said softly. "Or perhaps this is only the beginning." Elias barely had time to catch his breath. The mist from the fallen warrior still lingered in the air, swirling like dying embers. The chamber trembled, as if the very foundation of this place had been shaken by his defiance. Across from him, Queen Syra stood still, her golden eyes locked onto him with something different. Not just fury, not just disdain. Curiosity. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken meaning. Then, with a wave of her hand, the entire arena shifted. The towering stone pillars receded, melting into the ground. The once solid walls began to ripple, warping like liquid metal. The air itself vibrated, a low hum pressing against Elias's skull. And then, the chamber vanished. Elias staggered as the world changed around him. Suddenly, he was standing on a bridge of light, suspended over a chasm of endless darkness. Strange, glowing symbols pulsed beneath his feet, forming a pathway that stretched into the unknown. Above him, stars flickered in an unnatural sky, constellations shifting and twisting like they were alive. Zara appeared beside him, her presence as commanding as ever. "You passed the first trial, but you are not yet worthy, human," she said, her voice laced with something that almost sounded like amusement. Elias exhaled, gripping the sword tightly. "Then let's skip the theatrics and get to it. What's next?" The queen raised her hand. The bridge extended into the void, revealing an enormous structure ahead. A floating temple, carved from black stone, adorned with glowing blue veins of energy. Its towering entrance seemed to pulse, like it was alive. Elias felt a chill creep down his spine. This place, it wasn't just ancient. It was watching him. Zyra gestured toward the temple. "Inside lies the truth of the Zyphorian Empire. If you wish to wield the blade as its master, you must face what is within." Elias narrowed his eyes. "And if I don't?" Zyra smirked. "Then the blade will consume you." "Great, just great." With no other choice, Elias stepped forward. Each step on the bridge felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted him. The moment he crossed into the temple, a strange sensation gripped his chest, like invisible hands pressing down on his heart. The interior of the temple was vast, stretching endlessly in all directions. Floating platforms hovered above a deep abyss, shifting and rearranging themselves in unnatural patterns. The walls pulsed with symbols, whispering in a language Elias didn't understand, but somehow felt. He took another step, and the whispers turned into screams. Elias clutched his head, staggering as the voices crashed into him. Thousands of them. No, millions. Echoes of the past, voices from forgotten warriors, their pain, their rage, their desperation. His vision blurred. He saw flashes, memories that weren't his. A Zyphorian soldier, kneeling before a council of shadowed figures. A fleet of warships descending on a planet, their weapons burning the sky. A lone warrior standing at the heart of a battlefield, holding the very same sword Elias now carried. His armor cracked, his voice a whisper of defiance. Then, a single word cut through the chaos. "Remember." Elias gasped, yanked back into the present. His heart pounded. His hands shook. He wasn't just seeing memories. He was reliving them. "Your mind is strong, human," Hera said from behind him, her tone almost approving. "But this is only the beginning." Elias turned to her, breathless. What was that? Zyra stepped forward, the blue energy of the temple reacting to her presence. The Zyphorian blade is not just a weapon. It is a conduit, a vessel of knowledge and power. It remembers every wielder, every battle, every betrayal. And now, it is testing you. Elias clenched his fists. Testing me for what? Zyra's gaze darkened. To see if you are strong enough to carry the burden of its truth. Before Elias could respond, the temple shifted again. The floating platforms rearranged, forming a narrow pathway leading to a massive circular chamber ahead. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it, a second blade, identical to the one Elias held. But this one was broken. Elias felt a strange pull toward it, his entire body drawn forward, as if by an invisible force. "Go," Tyra commanded. "See for yourself." He hesitated, but then, slowly, he stepped forward. The closer he got, the heavier the air became. The whispers returned, softer this time, but insistent. And then, as he reached the pedestal, the whispers became a voice. "Why did you betray us?" Elias froze. The voice wasn't from the temple. It wasn't from the past. It was coming from inside him. He looked down at the broken blade. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, reflecting not just his face, but another's. A warrior clad in black armor, eyes burning with a mixture of rage and sorrow. Then, it moved. Before Elias could react, the figure stepped out of the blade, materializing in front of him like a living shadow. Elias staggered back. What the hell? The figure raised its head, and Elias's breath caught in his throat. Because the warrior standing before him was him. Elias couldn't move. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as he stared at the figure before him. It was him, the same face, the same eyes, but different. The doppelganger's armor was darker, heavier, covered in deep cracks as if it had endured centuries of battle. Its expression was unreadable, a mixture of pain and fury. And then, it spoke. "You should not be here." The voice wasn't human. It was layered, as if 1,000 echoes whispered alongside it. Elias clenched his fists. "Who are you?" The figure took a step closer. The air between them crackled with energy, heavy with something Elias couldn't quite grasp. Power, memory, something more. "I am what you will become." A cold chill ran down Elias's spine. He tightened his grip on the sword, trying to steady himself. That's not an answer. The reflection tilted its head, eyes narrowing. Then, in a blur of motion, it lunged forward. Elias barely had time to react. He dodged, rolling to the side as the figure's blade slammed down, sending a shockwave rippling through the chamber. The pedestal shattered, and the floating platforms around them shifted wildly, throwing the entire space into chaos. Zyra stood at the edge, watching, not interfering. Elias gritted his teeth. If she wasn't going to help, he'd have to do this alone. The reflection turned to him, eyes burning. "You don't understand, do you? Enlighten me, then." Elias shot back, raising his sword. The figure's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "This blade was never meant for you." And then, it attacked again. Their swords clashed, sending sparks flying. Elias pushed forward, forcing the doppelganger back, but every move he made was mirrored perfectly. The reflection was stronger, faster, more precise. It fought with his instincts, his skills, but refined, as if it had already mastered every weakness he had. Elias barely blocked the next strike, his arms shaking from the impact. The voice came again, whispering in his mind. "You don't belong here. You never did." Elias growled, shoving the figure back. Then why is the sword still in my hands? For the first time, the reflection hesitated, and Elias saw his chance. He shifted his grip and drove forward, his sword cutting through the air. The reflection dodged, but not fast enough. The blade sliced across its chest, leaving a burning silver mark against the dark armor. The figure staggered back, and suddenly the entire temple reacted. The walls trembled. The floating platforms broke apart, drifting into the abyss below. The ceiling cracked, revealing a swirling storm of stars above them. Elias barely managed to stay on his feet as the energy in the room shifted, pulling everything toward the center. The reflection looked up, its expression unreadable. Then it smiled. A slow, knowing smile. Elias's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. "What did you do?" he demanded. The reflection stepped back, the shadows around it growing, twisting, merging with the darkness of the collapsing temple. "You are not ready, but the blade has chosen you anyway." The storm intensified. The broken platforms spun wildly as the chamber fractured into pieces. Elias could feel the very fabric of reality pulling apart. Zara finally moved, stepping forward, her eyes glowing with unreadable intent. "Enough," she commanded. Everything froze. The energy, the storm, the collapsing chamber, it all stopped, held in place by her sheer presence. Elias gasped, dropping to one knee from the sheer force of it. The reflection stared at her, then at Elias, before speaking one final time. "Remember this moment. When the time comes, you will understand." And then, it was gone. The shadows consumed it, dissolving it into nothing. The temple reassembled itself in an instant, the chaos vanishing as if it had never happened. The air settled, but the weight in Elias's chest remained. Zara stepped beside him, looking down at where the reflection had stood. "You faced the blade's truth," she said quietly. "Few ever do." Elias swallowed, still catching his breath. What the hell was that? Zara's golden eyes met his. A warning. Elias could still feel the weight of the encounter lingering in the air. Even though the shadow of his reflection had vanished, the words it left behind echoed in his mind. "You are not ready." But what did that mean? Zara stood beside him, her golden eyes locked onto the sword in his hand. The blade hummed faintly, as if alive, as if sensing what had just transpired. "You survived the first trial," she said, her voice unreadable. "But survival is not victory." Elias exhaled, gripping the hilt tighter. "So what now?" Another cryptic lesson. Another vision of something I can't understand. Zara tilted her head slightly. "No. Now you prove you deserve that weapon." Before Elias could question her, the entire temple trembled. A deep guttural sound filled the air. Something ancient, restless, and very much alive. The ground split apart, revealing a swirling void of dark energy beneath them. The pillars around them shattered, their floating pieces rising into the air, held by unseen forces. The very walls of reality seemed to warp and bend. And then, it emerged. A creature unlike anything Elias had ever seen. A mass of shifting, blackened metal and glowing red veins, its form constantly shifting and reshaping itself like a nightmare barely contained. It had no eyes, no face, only a twisted, writhing body of pure destruction. Zara remained still, her expression unchanging. "The guardian," she murmured. "The one who devours those unworthy of the blade." Elias barely had time to react before it lunged. He threw himself to the side as a massive claw of liquid metal slammed into the spot where he had just been standing, the force of the impact cracking the stone beneath it. The thing didn't pause. It twisted toward him, its body shifting and stretching, forming jagged spikes, blades, tendrils, an ever-changing storm of destruction. Elias raised the sword. It was his only hope. The creature lashed out again, a blade-like appendage slicing toward him. He barely managed to parry, but the sheer impact sent him skidding back. The sword vibrated in his grip, almost like it was fighting against him. "What's wrong with this thing?" Elias shouted. Zaira's voice cut through the chaos. "It will not fight for someone who doubts." The words struck him harder than the creature's attacks. He had been doubting himself, doubting the blade, doubting why it had chosen him. The guardian lunged again, and this time Elias didn't just defend, he attacked. He moved forward, dodging low beneath a strike and slashing upward. The blade sang, cutting through the creature's mass with a burst of silver energy. The guardian howled, its body rippling where the sword had struck. Elias felt something shift. The sword was reacting to him, responding. He pressed the advantage, dodging left, then right, each movement more instinctual than the last. The creature lashed out wildly, but Elias was already anticipating its attacks, moving with the blade as if it was guiding him. And then, he saw it, a weak point, a core of searing red energy at the creature's center, flickering like an exposed heart. Without hesitation, Elias leaped forward, driving the blade straight into the core. The reaction was instant. The guardian's body convulsed, its form breaking apart like shattered glass. A massive shockwave erupted outward, forcing Elias to brace himself as energy rushed past him. And then, silence. The creature was gone. The void beneath them sealed itself, the air stilled. The temple, once filled with chaos, stood undisturbed. Elias lowered his sword, his breath coming fast. Zaira stepped toward him, her expression unreadable. "You understand now, don't you?" Elias swallowed, looking down at the sword. It no longer felt heavy in his hands. It felt right. "Yeah," he murmured. "I do." Zaira studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you are ready for what comes next."